Good morning. It's a real great pleasure and honor for me to be here and give this grand rounds. So you want to know about this donkey? Yeah, actually, my background is in veterinary medicine. I'm a BBM, and we had this donkey was the mascot of the daycare system for kids. And the problem is that the donkey developed third-degree AV block and was doing syncope 3 to 5 times a day. And it's a big donkey, so was standing on the ground. And so the donkey became a very serious risk factor for the kids. So there were two options: euthanasia, which was not an option for the kids, or we would implant a pacemaker. So we did this implanting the cardiac circuits of the which were people in Moscow. And the donkey went well, and it was my first publication. Um, so these are my discussion this morning about the unfortunately, when Danny reviewed the so I decided then I will present of Aortic stenosis. So the reason why I chose this title is because aortic stenosis is a complex and multifaceted disease, and some mode of presentation are quite challenging from a diagnostic and therapeutic standpoint. So these are my real displays. In particular, we are the collab for several major private trials to which you participate. But before getting started, I would like to mention that I have several good friends here, and I have many more new friends since yesterday, and I'm sure I'll make new friends today as well. Catherine Otto has been for me a friend, but also a mentor, an external mentor. She has always been very supportive in my career, and I'm very um, grateful to your support, Catherine. And Danny has become a very good friend, and he has been very kind to ask me to lead some papers of the Vivid registry that he leads, and it's a fantastic registry. Um, Kevin O'Brien, some years ago, came in one of our Quebec symposium and gave great talks, and we have so common interest in research. Alan Perlman, Alan was, as you know, the editor in chief of CASE, and he invited me to become an associate editor. I learned so much with him. And and Mark Reisman, actually, we interacted a single occasion in the context of the partner trials and all these things. So, as you know, in the guidelines, you have this notion of stages for valvular disease and for aortic stenosis. So the stage A, that's the patient with AS, or bicuspid valve or aortic stenosis. Stage B, it's mild to moderate AS. Stage C, this is where the patient has reached the severe AS, but there is no symptoms. And you have two substages: C1, preserved LV ejection fraction; C2, depressed LV ejection fraction. And finally, you have the stage D, that is severe symptomatic case. And up to now, there is a class 1 indication for AVR only for the stage D and the stage C. For the C1, it's more controversial. And let's start with this first shade of gray about stenosis with this asymptomatic patient with severe C1 stage. 65-year-old woman, she's asymptomatic. Well, she claimed to be asymptomatic. LV ejection fraction is preserved. She has a bad looking valve, severely calcified with opening. The peak velocity is 5.1. 1 year ago was 4.8, so it means a progression of 0.3 meters per second within the past year. The mean gradient is 64. Valve area by continuity is 0.65 and index 0.35. So by all means, this is an hemodynamically severe stenosis. And the next step is to say, well, is this patient really asymptomatic? That's why what is recommended in this context is to do an exercise testing. Because indeed, about one-third of the patients with apparently asymptomatic CVRS, actually, when you put them in a treatment, they have exercise limitations. And these patients, of course, have worse outcomes. So what about our patient today? Well, she did a good test, no falling blood pressure, good maximum work rate. So now we can conclude that she's a true asymptomatic patient with CVRS. And so the dilemma here, and the big debate at the present time, should we do an early prophylactic AVR versus the watchful waiting strategy where we're going to wait for symptoms or LV dysfunction to intervene. And the guidelines, well, support more the watchful waiting strategy. There is no class one indication for this entity, but there are some opening as well. So we did this analysis. I don't like to call it a meta-analysis, limited number of studies that we did. So pooled analysis of some studies that we did with. And actually, if you do this pooled analysis, there is obviously some superiority of early intervention versus watchful waiting in this asymptomatic AS population. Having said that, all these studies were not randomized, some were retrospective. So there's a huge potential for bias to be interpreted. So what do we have in the guidelines, the European guidelines and the American? Well, there is a no class indication, but not vague. So there is some opening if the patient has a low surgical risk and any of the following criteria. The most important one is probably the presence of a very severe AS, which is defined in the American guidelines as a peak depth velocity of 5. Also, presence of severe valve calcification and fast progression of the stenosis could be considered as a criteria. And in the European guidelines only, you also have markedly elevated BNP, decreasing blood pressure during exercise, and pulmonary hypertension. And our patient today actually has very severe fast progressive valve calcification. And indeed, uh, when we look at the valve, we often measure the hemodynamics and the gradients and the valve area. But as Catherine also recommended in one of the look at the valve, and this is very true. And indeed, the assessment of the mortality of the valve is important. And the degree of calcification, assessed by echo here in the paper of Rafa and Roosevelt, is a powerful predictor. The problem of echo to assess the calcification is that it's semi-quantitative and it is very dependent on the settings and the operator. So we have now multi-detector computed tomography that can be used to obtain an accurate and reproducible measurement of calcification. And this is easy to perform, associated with low radiation exposure because it's non-contrast CT. And I think it's getting more and more into practice. It is now in the open guidelines as a tool to confirm the stenosis severity in some cases. And when you have severe valve calcification, um, that is defined using this cut point in women and men, and we'll come back on this. Well, this is associated with an increased risk of mortality with fast progression, but very powerful predictor of outcome. And this makes sense because calcification for obviously lesion. Um, so, um, of course, then up to now we only look at the but we also need to look at the impact of stenosis on the cardiac candle and endovascular function because this is what will determine the outcome. And we should go beyond the alveolar contraction. The alveolar contraction indeed can be estimate the extent of myocardial infarction in patients with LV as is often the case for in patients with autism. And if you look only at the alveolar contraction, oh, that's a beautiful day. Blue sky, blue sea. But if you look at other parameters that are more sensitive, might be a different story. And indeed, what you know, as a French, I was born in France. To try to find a French what our eyes see is not necessarily what our heart feels. In the sense that what you see is the alveolar contraction, but what your heart feels might be different. And there are other parameters than the heart feels, the assessment of functional functional function, which is more sensitive because it is an earlier, more sensitive marker of clinical dysfunction. And in these patients, asymptomatic CPDS may concern that you have subclinical myocardial fibrosis and dysfunction that will and eventually become irreversible. Too late, will not be able to bring back this patient to the normal state. And indeed, if you look at all studies in the literature, about one-third of the patients with asymptomatic CVAS actually have a depressed notional function as assessed by the global notional strength, such as the patient in this case. And these patients have worse outcomes. Now, of course, global notional strength is probably a surrogate marker of fibrosis as well as function. And why not looking directly at mankind using CMR. And this technique is more and more used, at least on the research side. We can assess the focal replacement hypothesis by late Gabellian lines, and with T1 mapping, we can assess the diffuse interstitial hypothesis. And as in many cardiovascular diseases in AS, there are several studies showing association between large percent of myocardial fibrosis and mortality outcomes. And according to this study, replacement fibrosis by LGE is associated with somewhat worse outcome compared to the extracellular volume, so the interstitial fibrosis measured by T1 mapping. And in this other paper by Mark Dweck, actually, the replacement fibrosis by LGE appears to be more specific to the aortic stenosis compared to a fibrosis located more in the subendocardial layer that is determined by coronary artery disease. Another way to look at this in Europe, imaging, is to look at blood biomarkers to assess the repetition impact of the stenosis on the left heart. And if you look at the guidelines and in the literature, you see that elevated BNP is associated with worse outcome, as in many other cardiovascular. The problem is how we define elevated BNP. If you look in the literature, you have many different things. And well, for example, this patient today has a BNP of 189. She's a woman, 65 years old. Is it normal for her? Is it mildly elevated? And this is where the study from Marianne Clavel, who is actually one of my former PhD students, and did this work when she was a fellow at the Mayo Clinic. Instead of looking at the absolute value of the BNP measured in the patient, they look at the BNP ratio, the ratio of the BNP measured in the patient divided by the normal reference value for the age sex. And if the BNP ratio got higher than 1, then you start to see some mortality in this patient. And so now in the European guidelines, they define markedly elevated BNP as a BNP ratio more than 3, and this is a criteria to consider early intervention in basic hepatic disease. So the patient today has actually a BNP ratio of 2, so she is at increased risk. So in this debate of early prophylactic LDR versus watchful waiting, I think we should move away from the watchful waiting and evolve toward more active surveillance with echo and multimodality imaging. And of course, assess, look at the valve, assess the anatomic and hemodynamic severity with echo, of course, but also with the CT when it comes to the valve classification. And of course, then look at the impact on left ventricle and left atrium. Global notional strain might be an interesting tool. It's not a panacea, and there are some issues. If you use different platforms, you come up with different numbers, so there are still issues to see. BNP ratio might be an interesting addition, but again, it's not a panacea. It's not specific to aortic stenosis. Diastolic dysfunction is important to consider E ovary prime, dilation of the left atrium. And we have to remember that most of the patients become symptomatic because of diastolic. So assessment of diastolic dysfunction. And myocardial fibrosis, I think for now it remains a research tool. We don't have any precise point on where we should intervene earlier or later, so we need more work on this. And don't forget the right side and the right vascular function and the pulmonary application. So in this context, we propose this approach with Philippe Nebel in Morrison in New York, where actually similar to what we do in oncology. Why not having a grading of the aortic stenosis, like we grade the tumor, and then a stage is the extension. So, so the grading is to assess the severity of the stenosis. Grade 0 is aortic stenosis, 1 is mild, 2 is moderate, and 3 is severe. And then you have the cardiac damage, the extension, that is assessed by the staging. So stage 0, no cardiac damage. Stage 1, left ventricular damage. Stage 2, we are going to left atrium and mitral valve. Stage 3, pulmonary arteries and tricuspid, and stage 4, right ventricle. Okay. And for those with grade 3 and stage 1 or more, well, there are already indications for it. For the all the categories in yellow, probably we need trials. There are some trials ongoing, as we'll see. So, what are the criteria that guidelines. So stage zero means you would have LV hypertrophy or increased ovary prime, so gastric dysfunction, or depressed ejaculation fraction, of course, and or. Stage two would be dilation of the left atrium, atrial fibrillation, moderate CVMR. Stage three, we are talking about pulmonary hypertension or moderate severe tricuspid regurgitation, and finally, stage four is moderate severe dysfunction. Of course, I mean it's a first proposal. This algorithm and staging should be fine-tuned, and we tested this staging in the partner trial. So we are not talking about asymptomatic severe, of course, it's symptomatic severe population, and we look at the mortality post-TAVR, but look at the rest. I've never seen a score or a stage that discriminate the risk of mortality as well as this staging. And even if you adjust for COPD or coronary artery disease, the discrimination remains very clear. Of course, the next step is now to apply and validate this this approach in patients with asymptomatic AS. So TAVR has certainly, as you know, revolutionized the management of aortic valve replacement, and up to now we have focused on patients with extreme high and intermediate risk, and we are now validating this technology in the low-risk population with the partner 3 trial. But there are new indications potentially in the future, and one of the potential new indications will be the severe AS asymptomatic population, and there are actually two ongoing randomized trials, early TAVR trial, and also another smaller trial, the EVO trial in the UK. So this is the design of the early TAVR trial. We are talking about 1,100 patients with severe AS, high gradient AS, and they are confirmed to be asymptomatic by exercise testing and randomized to early TAVR, so TAVR now, transfemoral TAVR versus a clinical surveillance. So surveillance and eventually TAVR or TAVR later when symptoms develop. So what we are testing in this trial is really the timing of intervention. So PVR now. Um, so up to now, we looked at the C1 stage. Now we have the D stage. D stage means severe AS with symptoms, and the D1 stage is really the high gradient, um, the typical form of AS. That is a no-brainer because if you have high gradient, severe AS, symptomatic, that's an indication for it. But besides this D1, you also have other subtypes in the D stage, all the low gradient AS. So how do we define low gradient AS? Well, it's a small valve area, severe AS, but with a low gradient, participant with non-severe. So there is a discordant grading here. Valve area tells you that the stenosis is severe, main gradient tells you that the stenosis is not severe. And if the patient is symptomatic, you have to titrate this, right? And there are three subtypes of low gradient AS. You have those with depressed elevation fraction. That's what we call a classic low gradient. D2 stage in the guidelines. This is in fact the HREF form of the AS with low gradient. Okay? And then you have those with preserved EF, but nevertheless low flow. Low flow is defined in the guidelines as a stroke volume index lower than 35 ml. So they have low flow despite preserved EF. That's why we call them paradoxical low flow low gradient AS. It's a D3 stage in the guidelines, and in fact, this is the HREF form with low gradient. And finally, you have an intermediate subset, which is patients with preserved EF, normal flow according to stroke volume index, but still the discordance between valve area and gradient. And that's what we call the normal flow low gradient AS. And we'll discuss this patient at the end. So let's start with this classical low flow low gradient with reduced EF, the HREF form of AF with low gradient. Typically in this patient, what you would like to do is first assess what we were calling before the contractile reserve. Now it's named in the guidelines the flow reserve. Is defined as a percent increase in flow volume of 20 or more. So if there is flow reserve, this is good news in terms of prognosis, and if the gradient increases above 40, valve area remains small, this is good indication for validation. On the other hand, if the gradient remains below 40, the valve area increases above 1, this is rather pseudo areas, and up to now there's indication for valve replacement. But this patient, they need optimized heart failure therapy and close follow-up. And then you have about one third of the patients who have no good response to vitamin D, no flow reserve. And so, while these patients often the vitamin Spaseco remains inconclusive. And then you need to consider other modalities and calcium scoring to differentiate the true versus low severe areas. The other issue with those no flow reserve is that, as we see, they have a high surgical risk, and so we may eventually consider a TAVR. So let's look at the two cases. Here you see this patient has a good contractile reserve, good flow reserve. The volume goes from 53 to 73. The gradient that was moderate at rest 29 is now at 52, so severe. And the valve area remains severe around 0.75. So now, at the end of the vitamin cycle, both parameters are concordant. They are both severe. So this is a severe AS case with flow reserve, good candidate for valve replacement. Now this other patient here, as opposed to previous one, some increased LV ejection fraction, but no significant change in flow volume, and so also no significant change in gradient and valve area. So what can I conclude in this case? Well, there is no flow reserve, so high surgical risk. In stenosis severity, I don't know. So this is where calcium scoring is not helpful. Of course, calcium scoring is not again panacea, it's not perfect. It is not assessing directly the hemodynamic severity. What we are assessing here is anatomic severity. But it is useful to differentiate true versus pseudo severe AS. But you need to use different cut points in men and women. You see, it's higher than 2,000 in men and 1,200 in women, or in terms of density, 500 in men and 300 unit per centimeter square in women. And the case that I showed you is this one. So clearly consistent with the true CVAS, and AVI is indicated. So what is intriguing? Why do we have such difference between men and women in terms of calcium score? Well, as you know, it's very difficult or even impossible to explain the history of women's heart. I told you about the romantic title that I tried to use. If you have any suggestion, please send it to me. And so we tried to unveil this history, and actually we got some interesting data. And we made an important discovery today is that men and women are different. So this we can confirm. And they are different also in terms of the physiology, the type of lesion is different in men versus women. Actually, women have relatively less calcification compared to men, but in counterpart, they have relatively more valvular fibrosis. And of course, both fibrosis and calcification contribute to stenosis. But fibrosis is not captured, is not visualized by CT. So this is why we need to use different cut points in men and women. And this is also maybe another take-home message is that if there are some potentially pharmacotherapy in the pipeline, some pharmacotherapy may work in men but not in women, and vice versa. So what we have in the guidelines for these patients with a classical low flow gradient, the T2 stage, well, in the American guidelines, there is a clear recommendation for valve replacement if you have evidence of CVAS on the vitamin gradient higher than 40. The European guidelines have the two subcategories. For those who have flow evidence of CVAS, class 1. But if you have no flow reserve because of the high surgical risk, because of the uncertainty about the severity, class 2. And in this recommendation, they also suggest to do calcium scoring. So why do we have this nuance, if you will, in the European guidelines? Because in this historical study, when you have no flow reserve and you undergo surgical valve replacement, you see the operative mortality is very high, actually. But things have changed, and with TAVR now, this is the result of the Topaz TAVI registry that we presented at TCT and that is now in press in JACC. You see that actually there is no difference between those with flow reserve versus no flow reserve following TAVR, and the outcome overall is quite good. So that might be an argument for using TAVR in this. So this third shade of gray, again, at rest, at baseline, we have this small valve area with a low gradient and a low flow state, low LVEF. And we do the dobutamine, and what we see, there is flow reserve first, and the gradient increased somewhat, but remains moderate. And the valve area that was severe at first, 0.85, is now moderate, 1.1. So now both parameters at the end of the study, the valve area and they agree, say that those is moderate. But the question is then, moderate AS, could it be battle or is that and actually, there are several studies, including this one, the center study that we did, where actually we look at the outcome of this patient with moderate AS and depression. And the outcome is quite poor. At 3 years, about 50% had either died or got AVR or were hospitalized for heart failure. So I think it brings the concept that what is moderate AS or good ventricle point preserved in the fraction might actually be severe for depressed ventricle. It's always a question between the balance of the hemodynamic load versus what the ventricle is able to handle, right? So this led us to design another trial addressing this specific population with moderate AS and heart failure symptoms, HRAF, and this is the TAVR Unknown trial. It's ongoing. You're participating in this trial as well. It's a 600 patients with moderate AS, depressed and fraction, heart failure symptoms, optimized heart failure therapy, and they are randomized to TAVR and load this moderate AS. So it's afterload reduction that we are trying to do here versus medical therapy. So I think it's a provocative trial, but that addresses an important and clinically relevant issue. So the full shade of gray is this category of patients with paradoxical low flow, low gradient AS. So the HPF form of AS with low gradient as HPF seen more frequently in elderly women with hypertension. And they have this typical pronounced concentric remodeling with impaired diastolic dysfunction, they have diastolic heart failure, impaired longitudinal function. And because of this factor, they have a reduced volume, like the normal average. Plus the fact that this elderly population with AS and hypertension often have atrial fibrillation, mitral stenosis, MAC, mitral regurgitation, all will contribute to reduce the forward flow across the valve. And also there are some recent studies suggesting that up to 20% of these people with paralysis may actually have cardiac amyloidosis. We could screen for that. And this might be another cause of the reduced flow despite the preserved ejection fraction. And of course, if you have a low flow state and the gradient is highly flow dependent, you may also have a low flow despite the severe. And we need to identify this severe. So this is an example of such patient, 82-year-old woman with hypertension. She has heart failure symptoms, LV fraction is 65% or even more. This patient may have even supranormal LV fraction. But the longitudinal strength is depressed. She has grade 2 diastolic dysfunction with increased E over E prime. AS severity on echo valve area is severe, 0.64, indexed also for voice area, severe. The dimensionless index of Doppler velocity index is here, but the gradient is modest. The mean gradient is only 26. So we have obviously a discordance here. And the explanation for the discordance might well be the presence of the low flow because you see the problem index is only 29. And it makes sense. I mean, this ventricle, the small thick ventricle, interfering, even if the LV fraction is 65%, probably is not able to eject a normal stroke volume. And so what we have in the guidelines for this HPF form of AS with low gradients, so the D3 stage, well, in both the American and European guidelines, you have 2 recommendation if the patient is symptomatic and if you can confirm it. And we'll see how to do that in these patients in the next slide. And also in the American guidelines, very important point is that the patient needs to be normal because hypertension is important to this patient. And of course, we contribute to the low flow, the low gradient, to the discordant gradient, and to the but you have patients with hypertension. Let's try to optimize antihypertensive therapy and reassess the echo parameters and the symptoms. So this is the algorithm in the but in reverse. So when you have this low gradient situation, valve area? Well, the first thing is what they suggest is to assess the flow status. If you have a normal flow, it's probably next more than 55. But they conclude that the CVAS is unlikely. I somewhat disagree with that. I will show you some evidence later. I think it is certainly less likely, but not unlikely. And then if you have a low flow and a reduced LVF, what is recommended is to do double time to assess the flow reserve and differentiate it through the velocity. On the other hand, if there is preserved EF, well, probably the vitamin more depth, and we should consider more an integrated approach. And this integrated approach, as you see in the table, is mainly based on the calcium scale, using the cut point that we previously reported. And so we did the calcium score in this patient and she got a 3200. I'm sure that Catherine also would have said, I don't really need the calcium either. You could say that as well. But at least you have a number and you have more arguments for that you can look for interventional cardiology or cardiac surgeon. And you know that if you have heavily calcified valve as well, stenosis will progress very rapidly. So this patient got a TAVR with a secondary valve that actually had a good evolution. So the last shade of gray I would like to discuss here, made even the sake of time, I think we'll cover shades of gray, but there are more. Um, normal flow gradient AS. Well, this is a patient with a preserved LVH fraction, but here the flow is normal, okay? 38, so normal flow, but still, I still have this discordance with a small valve area and a low gradient. And we really paid attention to the multi-window interrogation in order not to miss the highest velocity. We are pretty confident with the measurement of the diameter velocity. So, how is it possible to have this? And is it possible to have a severe stenosis with this pattern? Well, the first thing we have to think of is measurement. We may overestimate the flow volume by putting the volume close to down, or underestimate the volume. That's the first thing we need to do. Also, when we say normal flow, it's based on stroke volume, 35 or more. But you may have a normal stroke volume, but a reduced mean flow rate. And the gradient is dependent on the stroke volume, but also the ejection. And so the mean flow rate. So we also need to calculate in respect to the mean flow rate, stroke volume divided by elevation. And when it's less than 200 seconds, yes, you have normal stroke volume, but you have reduced mean flow rate. And this will often happen in patients with bradycardia and beta longer elevation. One recent paper that we did, where we discovered that it was a large animal model study and also study from patient. And actually, again, hypertension and reduced arterial compliance because you have a fast reflection of the arterial pulse from the periphery may dampen the gradients even if the flow is relatively normal and stenosis. And finally, you may have also this pattern because of inconsistency in the guidelines. Because the cut point value of 1 square here in the guidelines actually do not correspond to the cut point value. But I mean, even from a standpoint of fluid mechanics, if you use the Golin formula, you put a normal flow rate and a valve area of 1, actually, this will correspond more to the and vice versa. A cut point of 40 millimeters of mercury will rather correspond to 0.8. So some patients are misclassified because of this. So the patients with normal flow gradient, they are just in the gray zone in the moderate to severe. So most are moderate actually, but you have 40 to 50% who are severe. And if they are symptomatic, well, they will probably not need to go to a public. This is where I disagree somewhat with the guidelines. It's not unlikely, it's less likely, but it's not unlikely. So we did this meta-analysis and actually found that in paradoxical low flow, low gradient, well, these patients have increased risk of mortality compared to moderate cancer, but also compared to high gradient. And importantly, the outcome of this patient was improved by ADL. Of course, it's meta-analysis, it's an average, but it does not mean that each individual patient with paradoxical low flow will improve ADL. In some patients, this treatment will be high. And I think the next step is to identify the patients where eventually the treatment will be. gradient AS, well, outcomes similar to high gradient AS, better than low flow gradient AS. I mean, if you have a normal flow, you have better outcomes than if you have low flow. And again, AVR improves survival. And I think this is consistent with what I just showed you, that a good proportion of these patients may have severe. So this is the results of the stock analysis of the 1A trial, where actually we found that in the subset of paradoxical low flow gradient, that was actually 4%. We have to take this strictly, but this was one of the few subsets we got 1A, where actually TAVR was significantly better compared to TAVR, at least initially. So maybe in this particular paradoxical low flow gradient, small things that small annulus, and diastolic dysfunction TAVR may offer better results. So the take-home message when you are confronted with this difficult subset of patients with symptomatic low gradient all Bavaria and the low gradient, first step is to check, confirm the accuracy of measurement and rule out measurement error. And the beauty of echo is that we can measure the same phenomenon by different ways. And if the numbers fit together, this is reassuring. But it's called in numbers, then you have to recheck some measurements, especially the LVOT diameter, for example. And the second step is to identify the type of low flow low gradient. Is it a classical low flow low gradient, so the HREF form, a paradoxical low flow low gradient, the HREF form, or a normal flow low gradient? Because it has implications with regards to the outcome, with regard to the diagnostic workup and the therapeutic engagement. And of course, the third step, very important, is to confirm stenosis severity, because as we've seen, about 50 to 60% of the patients have a non-severe. We need to rule out this patient. So dopamine stress echo, a low dose dopamine stress echo, is the preferred diagnostic test in those patients with a classical low flow within the low EF, but not in those with preserved EF. In these patients, I think CAS scoring becomes really an interesting alternative. And don't forget, in any category, of course, to look at the valve by TTE or preferably TE, because this provides important information regarding the severity, the anatomic severity of the stenosis. And the last step is to select the type of AVR, because now we have the option between TAVR versus SAVR. There is some evidence that in the classical low flow low gradient HREF, well, actually, a transfemoral TAVR may be preferred, because in these patients with highly vulnerable use the least invasive procedure. Paradoxical low flow low gradient, there might be advantage to use TAVR, but we need more data. Normal flow low gradient, yeah, well, we should use the same select TAVR versus TAVR according to assessment of surgical risk as recommended by the guidelines. So this is my team, a fantastic team, and as you would note, the ratio of women versus men is about 4 to 1. The reason are that number one, women have longer life expectancy than men, so it's a better investment for me. Uh, Second, they are able to do multitasking. With men, we have more difficulty to do. And third, they develop a form of autism that is very interesting to study. Um, and after all these 50 shades of gray, or at least 5 shades of gray, I will go back to the great white tonight and in the weather forecast. All right, thank you very much.